was a calm yet somber evening at the precinct, the kind that lulled even the most vigilant officers into a sense of monotony. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was the only sound that seemed to echo through the otherwise quiet room. The clock on the wall ticked closer to the end of Michael's shift, and his mind wandered, drifting towards the warmth of home. He thought of his daughter, Rachel, eagerly waiting for him with her school project. The thought of seeing her excitement when she showed him the final product of her hard work gave him a sense of peace. After 2 decades of facing the chaos and unpredictability of the job, it was these quiet, mundane moments that made him feel grounded, as if he was finally close to something normal. Beside him, Brian, his younger partner of just 6 months, scrolled absent-mindedly through some reports, the blue glow of his screen illuminating his face in the otherwise dim room. Though relatively new to the force, Brian had already seen enough on the job to understand that peace was often fleeting. The emotional toll of their work was something neither could escape, even in moments of calm. "Just another half hour," Michael muttered to himself, his tone a mix of weariness and relief. The hours had passed slowly, and he was ready to leave the station and unwind. Brian glanced up, catching Michael's words, and nodded in understanding, though the same exhaustion was not yet as apparent on his younger face. But fate had different plans. Without warning, the sharp ring of the phone shattered the station's quiet, slicing through the otherwise peaceful atmosphere. It was a jarring sound, unexpected and urgent, cutting through their anticipation of an uneventful night. Brian's hand shot out instinctively to answer the call, putting the phone on speaker so both officers could hear. 911, what's your emergency? He asked, his voice steady and professional, a stark contrast to the tension rising in the room. A child's voice came through the line, trembling, barely audible. "Please, help me, before he comes back." The words hung in the air like an electric charge, a jolt of fear shooting through Michael's chest. His tiredness was replaced instantly by a wave of alertness, as if his body knew, deep down, that this would not be an ordinary call. Michael straightened up in his chair, his mind snapping into focus. "What's your name, kid?" he asked gently, his voice soft to reassure the child. There was a long pause, and then the boy's voice came through again, rushed and filled with panic. "He's going to hurt me again. Please, hurry." Brian exchanged a glance with Michael, his expression showing a mixture of confusion and concern. He leaned in closer to the phone, asking urgently, "Where are you?" The boy hesitated, every second seeming like an eternity. His voice dropped to a whisper filled with terror. "Please, just don't let him find me." Then, as quickly as the call had come, the line went dead. Without a word, Michael and Brian locked eyes, a shared understanding passing between them. "Let's move," Michael said firmly, grabbing his car keys. The 2 officers bolted out of the station, the air between them charged with urgency as they prepared to face whatever awaited them. The address led them to the outskirts of town, a quiet area far from the hustle and bustle of the city center. There, hidden behind a dense thicket of trees and overgrown weeds, stood an abandoned 2-story house. The structure was in a state of disrepair, its once bright facade now covered in dirt and grime, the broken windows staring at them like vacant, soulless eyes. The house seemed to loom in the shadows of the night, its eerie silence adding to the oppressive atmosphere. The faint breeze stirred the weeds in the yard, creating an unsettling rustling sound that only added to the sense of dread creeping over them. Brian stepped out of the car first, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, illuminating the dilapidated house with an eerie glow. "Is this really it?" he asked, skepticism lacing his voice as he surveyed the unsettling scene. Michael nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "It matches the address." They approached the house cautiously, their senses heightened. The quiet was deafening, broken only by the sound of their footsteps crunching on the gravel. Michael knocked on the door, his voice firm but calm, as he announced their presence. "Police, is anyone inside?" No response came, only the cold, empty silence that seemed to echo through the air. With a glance at Brian, Michael pushed the door open. The moment it creaked open, the stench hit them, an overwhelming mix of decay, mildew, and filth that seemed to cling to the very walls. Inside, the scene was chaotic, as if the house had been abandoned in a rush. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, and moldy food was left on the counters, the remnants of a life abandoned and forgotten. There was a general sense of neglect and despair in the air, and the very atmosphere seemed to press in on them. "This place looks uninhabitable," Brian murmured, his voice tinged with disgust as he covered his nose. Michael's eyes scanned the room, his training kicking in. "Let's split up. Be careful," he instructed, his voice low but commanding. The search took them upstairs, where the floorboards groaned and creaked under their weight. The house seemed to moan in protest with every step they took, as if it were alive and warning them to leave. At the end of a narrow hallway, they came across a door that stood out from the rest of the house. It was oddly pristine, the wood not as worn and weathered as the rest of the house. Cautiously, they approached it, their hands ready on their weapons. Inside, they found a small bedroom, its interior strangely tidy and almost untouched by the decay around it. The bed was made, the blankets folded neatly as though someone had tried to create some semblance of normalcy in the midst of chaos. The contrast between the rest of the house and this room was jarring, and it spoke volumes about whoever had been living there. "Looks like someone's been living here," Brian noted, his voice soft with disbelief as he noticed the neatness of the room. But their attention was quickly drawn to another door, a heavy wooden one, its surface scarred from years of disuse but still standing strong. The door was padlocked from the outside, a disturbing detail that sent a chill down their spines. "Kid, are you in there?" Michael called out, his voice a mix of urgency and compassion. The soft tone meant to reassure the frightened child on the other side. A faint reply came, barely audible, but it was enough to send Michael's heart racing. "I'm here." Brian immediately moved to work on the lock, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline coursing through him. Michael stayed close, his voice low and steady as he reassured the boy. "We're here to help you. Just hold on." When the door finally swung open, what they saw was enough to steal their breath. A boy, no older than 7, sat curled on a tattered mattress. His appearance was haunting. His face was gaunt, his eyes wide with terror, his body trembling from fear and malnutrition. A heavy chain was secured to his ankle, shackling him to the bed frame. Michael knelt down, his heart aching for the child in front of him. His voice cracked with emotion as he whispered, "You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here." The boy, trembling uncontrollably, clung to Michael's arm with desperation. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of their hearts. "He's coming back." Suddenly, the sound of heavy boots echoed from downstairs, breaking the silence with the foreboding sound of approaching danger. Michael's instincts kicked in, and he motioned for Brian to stay with the boy, his eyes dark with determination as he prepared himself for whatever confrontation awaited them. Moments later, the door burst open, and a man stormed into the room, his face twisted with fury, his eyes wild with rage. "What do you think you're doing? That's my kid," he bellowed, his voice filled with venom as he lunged at Michael, his hands outstretched in an attempt to strike. The struggle that followed was violent and chaotic, an explosion of fists and desperation. The man was strong, fueled by a mix of fear and anger, and fought with a ferocity that seemed to know no limits. But Michael and Brian were both trained for situations like this. They had been through countless encounters, and despite the man's strength, their resolve was stronger. The fight was brutal, but Michael and Brian's training and determination prevailed. With a swift move, they managed to subdue the man, pinning him to the ground and securing him with handcuffs just as backup arrived, sirens blaring in the distance. As the officers escorted the man out of the house, Michael returned to the boy, his heart heavy with relief, but also sorrow. The boy was trembling uncontrollably, his body a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and trauma. Michael quickly took off his jacket and wrapped it around the boy, shielding him from the night's chill. "You're safe now," he said gently, his voice breaking as he looked at the child. "No one will hurt you again." The boy didn't speak, but the silent tears running down his face spoke volumes. At the hospital, the boy was examined by doctors who discovered the full extent of the horrors he had endured. He had been neglected and abused for years, his only comfort being the small room he had tried to keep clean, attempting to create a sanctuary amidst the chaos. As the doctors worked to help him, Michael and Brian stood in the waiting area, their faces grim, processing everything that had just happened. Michael looked at Brian, his voice quiet but filled with admiration. "This kid's courage saved his life tonight." Brian nodded, his eyes distant. "It makes you wonder how many others are out there, too afraid to call." Later that night, after everything had calmed down, Michael finally returned home. His daughter Rachel was waiting for him, her school project clutched in her hands. She ran up to him, excited to show him what she had done, but Michael found himself unable to focus. His mind kept drifting back to the boy, his haunted eyes lingering in his thoughts. That night, as the precinct filed its report, Michael made a silent vow to himself. No matter how small or desperate the voice on the other end of the line, he would always listen.